We're going to head to Thailand, where the country's prime minister is promising to crack down on anti-government protesters who've been demonstrating in the country for months. Last night, thousands of demonstrators descended on police headquarters and threw paint on the building. One day earlier, dozens of people were hurt when police used water cannons and tear gas to quell dissent. The prime minister responded to the continued unrest today, promising the government would intensify its actions against protesters who he accused of breaking the law. So Jonathan Head has been following these protests going on the ground in Bangkok. He is the Southeast Asia correspondent for our partners at BBC News. So glad you are joining us right now, Jonathan. These protests have been going on for months now. What are the demands of protesters, and how significant are these calls for reform?
Well, Anne-Marie, they began very much with targeting the Prime Minister, who is a former coup leader, and a system that he effectively wrote when there was military government here that ensured that even after an election last year, he stayed on as Prime Minister and his supporters managed to dominate Parliament. In particular, a very popular party voted for by young people was very controversially outlawed. And a lot of young people feel the system is rigged. They were targeting him, but as the months have gone on, particularly after we came out of COVID lockdown, there are very low COVID numbers here in June, they zeroed in on Thailand's king. Now that's unprecedented because the monarchy here is not only protected by ferocious laws, you can't criticise it, but traditionally Thais have always felt it's almost sacred, you simply can't touch it. But there's a new king in Thailand. He succeeded the throne 4 years ago. He's very controversial, not at all like his much loved father, has accumulated a lot more power, taken a lot of wealth as well, a lot of money into his own hands, and these young people feel that he's behaving like an absolute monarch. So they've broken a taboo, and all of their demands now, their key one is on reforming the monarchy. Conservatives in Thailand, those in power, say that's not even an option, so you've got two sides very far apart.
So then what is the Prime Minister promising when he talks about, intensifying actions against the demonstrators? What is the expectation that means?
Well, I think we're going to see a lot more charges against these young student leaders. What we haven't seen yet, and we have seen in the past in Thailand, is real force used. They're trying to avoid bloodshed because in the end, these are young people, often the children of middle-class, influential people. I think there's a realization in government you can't use guns against these protesters who've been very persistent, very imaginative. They've borrowed a lot of ideas from what we saw in Hong Kong in how to take on the police. But there are some very harsh laws in Thailand. Many of these protesters, I think 175, have had arrest warrants issued against them. Some of the charges carry 7 years in jail, some of them even life imprisonment. Whether they actually apply them or not, I think that's their tactic at the moment. I suspect also the government's hoping that at some point, though we haven't seen it yet, these young protesters are just going to run out of steam.
So we've been covering this over the past few days, even though it's been going on for months, and the protesting has certainly intensified. You yourself sort of got caught up in the mix, and you were sprayed with chemical-soaked water. What is happening now that has caused the protests to intensify so much? What's the trigger now?
The trigger then was proposals in Thailand's parliament, which the protesters believe is a compromised body, but that's the only body that can legally push forward political reforms. It was looking at proposals to change the constitution, but clearly was not going to take on the more dramatic demands of the student protesters relating to the monarchy. So these protesters were trying to get to parliament. The police feared that they might actually storm it and take it over, and they erected these formidable barricades. And we happened to be at the barricades and got caught in this fantastic cat and mouse as the police lobbed tear gas grenades. They had some very persistent water cannoners with chemicals in them. It was quite something to see. But we've seen these standoffs between the students and the authorities gradually escalating over these months. The big worry is if people start bringing guns. There were a few gunshots on Tuesday. It's just possible that might be a problem in future.
Yeah, that would be very concerning. As I understand it, the protesters have been using some sort of interesting, I guess, symbols. I heard about inflatable rubber duckies and a hand gesture from a movie. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, the ducks are a new one. We haven't seen that before. They actually, when Parliament was sitting, Parliament's beside the main river that goes through Bangkok, the students had planned to try and block MPs and senators from leaving Parliament by coming in sort of joke duck-themed boats. They were actually held off by the police, but they brought these in giant inflatable yellow ducks anyway. They've now become a feature, but it's what these protests are about. They're very imaginative. They're trying to entertain largely youthful followers. The three-fingered Hunger Games salute is interesting. That started after the coup 6 years ago, but very few people dared protest now. Now you see it everywhere. They've done it to the king as well, which is considered traditionally very insolent. We're seeing a whole range of very imaginative language as well used by these young protesters because they have to keep their crowds entertained. They're often out there for hours in tropical heat, and they each time they come up with a new theme, often derived from popular culture, a lot of popular songs as well that we're hearing.
Really interesting. Jonathan Head, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.